Decades before the modern crisis, the sleeping prophet, Edgar Cayce, warned of a future dominated by the architects of void. He foresaw a world where power would be held not by what one possesses, but by what one conspicuously lacks. The central figure would be the magnet of scarcity, a towering, consuming presence built of brass and need, whose entire existence would be defined by a massive, perpetual center of absence. His voice would not merely echo, it would vacuum all attention towards itself. To his followers, he would represent the ultimate scarcity, a leader who required everything and therefore deserved everything. To his enemies, he would be the black hole of decency, threatening to pull all substance into his insatiable orbit. Cayce's chilling revelation was that this figure, this Donald Trump equivalent, was merely the visible manifestation of a deeper strategy, the creation of a central void designed to drain the nation's energy. The true masters were the cult of the absent center, who specialized in managing the gravity of attention. Every crisis this figure creates, every demand for validation, every instance of self-aggrandizement, all are precisely calculated maneuvers to reinforce the gravitational pull of the void. And while the nation rushes to fill the gaping hole with emotion, outrage, or devotion, the hidden architects smile. The illusion of essentiality works perfectly. The world believes a man like Donald Trump is essential to the nation's function, but he is merely the perfectly weighted anchor, preventing the discovery of a stable, self-sufficient center. The vision of the brass anchor. The year was 1943. Cayce's mind surged toward a time when self-worth would be defined by external conflict, and the nation's health would be tested by the worship of the deficient. In the vision, the seer observed the magnet of scarcity. His aura was a heavy, dull brass, reflecting the constant, overwhelming nature of his need. He stood not before monuments of achievement, but before a vast digital chasm where his every utterance instantly generated a pull of compulsory focus. Below him, the masses were locked in a state of gravitational lock, unable to look away from the source of the overwhelming need. They saw in him a reflector of their own unaddressed deficiencies, a figure who commanded attention simply because he demanded it so loudly. But as Cayce's sight penetrated the brass facade, the consuming gravity revealed its origin. It was the reflection of collective insecurity. What seemed like raw power was, in fact, engineered deficiency, a need that was fabricated to be filled, not genuinely felt. His demands were absolute, yet Cayce heard the underlying constant hiss of the engineers of inertia, ensuring his needs were always just large enough to consume the surrounding environment. His charisma was a form of negative pressure, his presence a void. But none of the destructive consumption was spontaneous. He is the vessel of compulsion, Cayce whispered in trance, the magnetic core for those who control the very laws of attraction and repulsion. Around the magnet of scarcity, Cayce saw thick, intertwining cables of financial dependence and media panic, forming a hidden, immense network. These cables connected him to the cult of the absent center, the true masters of societal drain. They used him as a perfect, non-stop siphon, a sudden, arbitrary target of hatred here, a relentless demand for loyalty there, all designed to ensure the nation's emotional and cognitive resources flowed ceaselessly toward the central void. This man, whom the world knew as Donald Trump, was the ultimate black hole for the nation's political energy. Cayce realized that the new form of tyranny was the theft of internal completeness, invisible fields of insecurity, competitive envy, and the desperate urge to belong, injected directly into the nation's spiritual framework. He is the brass anchor of instability, Cayce declared, his voice heavy. Visibly empty and constantly demanding, yet he is merely the surface mechanism ensuring the flow of energy to the unseen owners. The public was trapped between feeding the void and being consumed by it. But Cayce saw a perfectly crafted gravitational weapon, designed to prevent the population from ever achieving escape velocity. And in the profound depths of the vision, as the nation exhausted itself fighting the magnetic pull, Cayce heard the conclave's cool, unified instruction. Let them feed the center, while we harvest the surrounding energy. The overwhelming pull of the magnet dimmed, revealing the truth. His persona was the perfect diversion from the profound emptiness in the collective soul, managed by the cult. The final phase of the gravitational deception will arrive. The prophet warned, when the people believe their purpose is to service the void. Yet the capacity for genuine, self-sustaining stability will already be forgotten. Cayce's vision then moved to the cult of the absent center. They sat in a chamber defined by perfect, emotionless efficiency, utterly insulated from the emotional turbulence they created. They were not political actors, but masters of energetic debt, specialists in how to maximize the distance between what the people desire and what they possess. They spoke only of resource flow, attention sinkholes, and the sustained state of unresolved tension. Their language was built on the manipulation of existential anxiety, designed to ensure the population never found peace outside their system. They who rule through cultivated need, Cayce whispered, will ensure that the nation is too busy being drawn toward the center to ever discover its own inherent value. The architects of void had perfected the secret. They no longer needed to control the nation's actions. They controlled the focus that dictated action. Their dominion was existential, their power residing in the invisible, constant pressure of inadequacy. They ensured that a figure like Donald Trump became the essential gravitational anomaly, the irresistible point of focus for both love and hatred. Both emotions, equally intense, provided the raw, energetic fuel necessary to maintain the central void. He was the perfect, self-sustaining emotional siphon. The chaos he generated served as the constant, necessary noise to drown out the internal whisper of self-worth. And Cayce, deeply disturbed by this realization, spoke the key to victory. When the people finally refuse to donate their energy to the center, the gravitational field will collapse. The only thing that can defeat the architects of void is collective recognition of inherent worth. Cayce saw the climax. The magnet of scarcity attempted one final, unprecedented pull of attention, designed to permanently exhaust the national will. But the people, having reached the point of volitional detachment, simply released their grip. The massive, consuming pull hit an unexpected barrier, the great internal fulfillment. The brass and need figure stood alone, his projected hunger failing to find the necessary external energy for sustenance. The architects of void were defeated not by fighting their gravity, but by achieving escape velocity. The sudden silence that enveloped the man signaled the turning of the tide. The pull ceased for the last time. The prophecy was clear. The true path to freedom was not fighting the void on its own terms, but by cultivating a sense of completeness so profound that the central emptiness held no magnetic power. The builders of internal wealth would rise, and their construction would be the unbreakable, self-sustaining soul. The magnet of scarcity exerted its final, most devastating pull, creating a national crisis of such consuming need that it threatened to break the social contract entirely. The cult of the absent center pushed the brass anchor, the Trump figure, to demand absolute, total submission, believing that collective exhaustion would finally force the population to surrender their agency and submit to the void for the promise of false stability. But Cayce foresaw the failure. The masses, having suffered through years of cognitive and emotional drainage, reached a point of existential fatigue. They realized that the pain of perpetual conflict was now greater than the fear of letting go. The volitional detachment began, not with a massive protest or a revolution, but with a simple, simultaneous refusal to engage the center. People recognized that the energy they were spending, the attention, the outrage, the devotion, was the only thing giving the void its terrifying gravity. The builders of internal wealth emerged from the periphery, guiding the populace not to fight the magnet, but to recenter their own consciousness. Their core teaching was the principle of internal sufficiency. You are complete. Your worth is inherent. The void needs your energy. You do not need its attention. Cayce saw the physical manifestation of this spiritual shift. The cables of financial dependence and media panic that tethered the magnet of scarcity began to slacken. The brass anchor's consuming demands, his relentless need for validation, suddenly met no resistance. He became a figure defined by the sheer unreturned echo of his own voice. The lack of energy flow caused the gravitational field to collapse inwards, revealing the true triviality of the center. The collapse of the magnet's power was, ironically, the moment the nation became truly rich in time, attention, and sovereign thought. The builders of internal wealth, the new architecture. The society that emerged from the shadow of the architects of void was structurally engineered to prevent the re-emergence of the central void. The builders of internal wealth formalized their philosophy into the directive of distributed value. The decentralization of focus, the concept of a single central figure, the very idea that one person could anchor the national narrative, was dismantled. Cayce's wisdom was enshrined in the new civic design. Power is not held, it is circulated. New governing models were designed around rapid, rotating leadership and decentralized, redundant systems, ensuring no single point of failure or gravity could exist. The currency of presence. The new economic model prioritized resources that could not be siphoned by the void. Experience, craftsmanship, communal health, and deep local knowledge. Products designed to fuel inadequacy or competitive envy, the engine of the cult of the absent center, were rejected by the market. The highest societal value was placed on contributive fulfillment, the sense of worth derived from useful, local effort, entirely independent of global recognition or digital metrics. The architecture of fulfillment. Physical and digital spaces were designed to induce calm and self-reflection, not compulsive engagement. Social media platforms, now run by civic nonprofits, adopted anti-siphon protocols. Algorithms that actively prioritized quiet achievement and collaborative progress over outrage and personal scarcity. They were designed to disperse attention, not concentrate it. The psychological scars left by the Trump era's constant pressure were healed through communal practice. Therapy of the void became central to education, teaching citizens to recognize the subtle internal feelings of unresolved inadequacy that the magnet of scarcity exploited. By addressing the deficiency at its source, within the self, they made the external magnet entirely inert, the final destiny of the architect of void. The cult of the absent center suffered the ultimate fate, non-existence in the face of fullness. They who understood only how to profit from deficit had no capacity to operate in a world defined by inherent worth. They could not buy attention, nor could they force conflict. Their highly complex systems, designed to manage energetic debt, became useless relics in a debt-free, attention-rich society. Cayce's final prophetic words on their end were simple. They starved in the presence of the infinite meal. They disappeared, not as villains, but as obsolete economic models. The memory of the magnet of scarcity, the brass and need figure, remained only as a profound lesson in existential physics. He was the perfect experiment that proved the ancient truth. The world mirrors the soul. When the nation's soul chose to be complete, the external vacuum collapsed. The age of internal wealth began. The ultimate freedom was the liberation from the gravity of external need, realizing that the power and worth they desperately sought externally had resided within their own unbroken, self-sustaining soul all along. The void directive was utterly defeated by the power of the full heart. The builders of internal wealth were acutely aware that the memory of the magnet of scarcity still held residual cultural energy. The final stage of the Reformation, therefore, involved institutionalizing self-sufficiency so deeply that the very notion of a central void became philosophically impossible. The concept of attention insurance was established. This was a form of societal collective agreement where citizens actively protected each other from the subtle returns of the cult of the absent center. If an individual felt their internal focus being hijacked by external, scarcity-driven narratives, they could trigger a communal alert, prompting localized support designed to re-anchor them to the principle of internal sufficiency. This mechanism ensured that the gravitational weapon could not target individuals in isolation. The restructuring of media was drastic. All news and informational flow was required to adhere to the substance-to-noise ratio (SNR) mandate. This metric rigorously penalized content built on fear, hyperbole, and conflict, the tools of the brass anchor, and heavily rewarded content that offered actionable knowledge, verified insight, and shared creative potential. The resulting information landscape was calm, deep, and focused on collaborative construction rather than competitive destruction. Cayce's guidance on the nature of the real threat was crucial here. The architects of void won by making people believe their internal deficits required external political solutions. The new civic education reversed this entirely, teaching that external problems were best solved by internal stability and communal consensus. The memory of the Trump figure and the chaos he represented was integrated into educational programs as the ultimate negative case study. Students analyzed his rhetoric not to judge the man, but to clinically dissect the mechanism of psychological dependency he induced. They learned how a leader built of brass and need could successfully project his own massive vacuum onto the entire populace, forcing them into a futile, exhausting effort to fill it. Cultural and technological redefinition. The cultural life of the new society rejected the worship of the deficient. Art was celebrated for its inherent completeness, requiring no external validation or hyperbolic fame to justify its existence. Art of the present moment focused on capturing the small, profound realities of life, deliberately avoiding the grand, consuming narratives that feed the gilded loop. Technology shifted from being a tool of extraction, of attention, data, and energy, to a tool of amplification, of human connection, local resilience, and knowledge synthesis. New digital interfaces were designed for low visual input and high cognitive output, prioritizing deep work and uninterrupted flow. The frantic, addictive scrolling that defined the era of the magnet of scarcity was replaced by deliberate, focused interaction. The ultimate failure of the cult of the absent center was their inability to comprehend authentic joy. Their systems were only calibrated for the predictable energy of anger and need. When the populace achieved the great internal fulfillment, a pervasive, quiet joy derived from shared purpose, the architects of void had no instruments to measure it, no algorithms to predict it, and therefore, no way to control it. Cayce's final words, echoing from the historical trance, summarized the ultimate lesson of the void directive. The nation achieved salvation, not by finding a strong man to lead them, but by realizing they needed no man at all. The central authority they sought externally was always the fullness of the collective soul, waiting to be acknowledged. The brass anchor rusted away, the cult of the absent center vanished, and the builders of internal wealth inherited a world finally free from the crushing gravity of lack. The shift that began in the former nation of the brass anchor quickly proved contagious. Cayce foresaw that the ultimate threat to the architects of void was not localized rebellion, but spiritual epidemiology. Once one major culture successfully achieved internal sufficiency, its stability and quiet prosperity became an irresistible model for others. Nations previously shackled by the cult of the absent center's debt accumulated specifically to service the central void, began to implement the directive of distributed value. They collectively repudiated the concept of energetic debt and focused on building local wealth ecosystems based on shared purpose and trust. The old globalized systems of finance, built on scarcity and competitive fear, the foundation of the magnet of scarcity, became isolated islands, their transactions slowing to a halt. Cayce's final readings emphasized the new, defining global conflict, the war of resonance. The remaining pockets of the architects of void attempted to destabilize the awakened world by exporting their chaos, funding new micro-magnets of scarcity in developing regions, hoping to reignite the necessary emotional drainage. But the global builders of internal wealth responded with a coordinated flow of generosity. They shared their self-sufficiency frameworks, providing educational and technological tools that empowered communities to identify and neutralize the signature of need before it could take root. This aid was given without expectation of return or debt, severing the core relationship between assistance and obligation that the cult of the absent center had so long exploited. The retreat to the abstract. The architects of void, masters of the tangible systems of control, media, finance, politics, found themselves with no ground to stand on. Their final retreat was into the abstract, the purest realms of unverified theory, esoteric digital currency, and closed-loop speculation. They became entirely detached from physical reality, attempting to build a final, desperate phantom empire based on complex, unintelligible systems. This move sealed their fate. Cayce noted that their power required the physical energy of human emotion. By abandoning the real world for the abstract, they finally starved themselves of the necessary fuel. Their digital currencies, designed to replace verified trust with manufactured scarcity, collapsed when the global populace chose tangible goods and local accountable exchange.